So the Festival in the Box, Las Vegas, went on sale today, and it sold out in about 90 minutes. I was able to pick some up. A lot of people weren't. I don't think I was expecting it to sell out that quickly. All the others, took hours to sell out, but this one didn't. So I don't know if they really throttled back the print run or if the price point was $200, which is what I figured it would be. It'd have to be that price point for me to get it, and I did. I picked up a few. These are some of the ones I bought before. Still haven't opened them yet, but it's a great deal. All you get for it. So when I get those others, I'll add that to the collection, but it sold out quicker than I thought it would. So yeah, I mean, I think that that's good that they are throttling back print runs and they don't print everything into oblivion. They give some air of collectability to Magic. So that's good. That's not really what I wanted to talk about today. That's just more of an aside. The main focus today was I was going to talk about one of my commander decks, among my oldest decks. My Norin the Wary deck. He's one of the few commanders I have that predates, really, the commander format being officially adopted by Wizards of the Coast. If anybody knows Norin, you know he comes and goes as he pleases. Whenever a player casts a spell or creature attacks, exile Norin the Wary. Return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at end of turn. Or at the beginning of the next end step is the new term for it. But so Norin's typically used as a very chaotic card, and this deck's no exception. Some of the more iconic cards you'll find in Norin build will be like Confusion in the Ranks, which whenever artifact, creature, or enchantment enters, its controller chooses a target permanent another player controller shares a type with it. Exchange control of those permanents. So basically, Norin leaves when someone casts a spell or attacks. In a turn, comes back. Norin will switch places with whatever the best creature on the board is. You get that, they get Norin. Next turn happens. That person plays a spell. Norin leaves. End of turn. Comes back under your control. Then you swap Norin with the other best creatures. So you keep accumulating all these best creatures, giving people Norin. And eventually you'll just wind up with all the creatures on board. It can be very annoying at times. Another annoying card that I run in the deck, but I've kind of been on the fence about maybe cutting this one, is a Possibility Storm. And this one is just sort of you put all of your annoying enchantments with Norin, and then you put out Possibility Storm to just stop people from thwarting your plans or blowing up your pieces. Because whenever a player casts a spell from their hand, they exile it, and then they exile cards from the top of their library until they exile a card that shows a card type with it. Then they may cast that card without paying its mana cost. And then you put all the cards revealed on the bottom of their library in a random order. And so Possibility Storm just makes it really difficult, because if your opponent has a board wipe or spot removal in their hand, they cast it, but it doesn't do anything, and they just get something off the top. Now, if your opponents if all their instants are spot removal, for example, and they play Swords of Plowshares, well, that goes away, but then they reveal off the top, and maybe they get a Generous Gift, maybe they get Path to Exile or some other spot removal, and then it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. You're still out either way. But that tends to happen very rarely. Most people with their card types do a variety of different things, and Possibility Storm makes it very difficult to get the effect you want when you want it. And with Norin being a little chaotic, that kind of works into the theme. So yeah, Confusion in the Ranks, Possibility Storm, those are a couple of cards you expect to see in Norin. Another one I put in just because I love it in this deck, Prisoner's Dilemma. Now this card was admittedly better when I was running damage doublers and triplers in the deck, but I eventually kind of took most of those out because this was like one of the outliers that really could do lots of non-combat damage, and so doubling that or tripling that would be really huge. But most of my effects in Norin only do 1 or 2 damage anyways, and so the damage doublers and damage triplers just weren't doing as much as compared to, say, something like Torbrand, which just adds +2 to whatever damage you're dealing. And, adding +2 is as good as tripling it when it's just 1 point of damage. So that's what I ended up doing. But Prisoner's Dilemma I've still kept in despite not having the damage doublers or triplers, because it's just such a fun effect. You get to do the Prisoner's Dilemma, and it's got Flashback. And I think it would be fun to put the excess damage spells back in just to buff this up, because I like the whole idea of leaving them no real good options, right? If everybody chooses silence, it'll deal 4 damage to him, but if it's double or triple, it's going to be 12, so they're taking 12 damage at a minimum. And then if somebody chooses to snitch, you can just knock people out of the game. So that aspect I think is fun. But even barring those damage increasing effects, I still like Prisoner's Dilemma in the deck and, you know, couldn't see cutting it. One that I keep going back and forth and cutting and taking out, Pandemonium. So Pandemonium is great with Norin, because whenever a creature comes into play, that creature's controller may have to deal damage equal to its power to target creature or player of their choice. So Norin comes in, he's 2 power, he deals 2 damage to any target. You know, that's great. But this is a symmetrical effect. So what tends to happen is I put this down, and then everybody else directs all the damage from their creatures entering at me, because they don't like playing against the chaos effects on the Norin deck. So I end up taking this out, but then I just keep thinking, well, maybe I can put it back in. Maybe I can do politics and convince other people to go after somebody else. But no, they always go after the Norin player. So it's probably only a matter of time before this gets cut for something else. Another one that might get cut is Panharmonicon. Now this one is another one of the only, you know, doubling effects I have, and that this, if it triggers, when a creature would enter, triggers an additional time, which, you know, you may think, well, that goes great with Norin, because he's just full of ETB trigger effects, and so doubling seems great. And it is. It's just, it's a 4-mana artifact, and the longer I've been playing, the fewer cards I've been running that just double up or give you a bonus effect, just because they don't really do much by themselves. And when I'm evaluating cards, I tend to look at, well, after a board wipe, if you just top deck this off a board wipe, you know, what would that do for you? And Panharmonicon, empty board, nothing else, it doesn't do a whole lot. And so it's in there for right now, but that's another one of the cards that I could see cutting. Another card that's still a relatively new addition to the deck is Embrace the Unknown, which is a source of card drawing that allows you to exile top 2 cards of your library, and then until the end of the next turn you may play those cards. And then you can retrace, by discarding a land card, you can cast it from your graveyard. So it's a nice recurring source. One thing to note is these cast from exile effects gets around Possibility Storm, because that only cares about cards played from your hand. So if you're in like a Prosper Tomebound deck, or something that cares about playing cards from exile, maybe look into Possibility Storm, because you can play your cards from exile just fine. You get to play what you want, but meanwhile everybody's deck playing cards from their hand are going to just be getting random cards. So for Embrace the Unknown, any type of exile impulse draw, that's where Possibility Storm really shines, because you're able to break that symmetry. But those cards are sort of the outliers in that I'm less certain about a lot of their inclusion. I mean, Confusion of the Ranks, Prisoner's Dilemma, they're probably not going anyway, but Pandemonium, Panharmonicon, Embrace the Unknown, and Possibility Storm still have yet to earn like a place as sort of being locked in. But most of the other cards in this deck I've been playing with for years, and you know, some of them are newer than others, but for the most part all these cards have earned their place, and I'm sure I'm going to keep them in the deck. And how I kind of wanted to do the rest of this deck discussion is just sort of go through a couple of tutors in the deck, and just sort of like a spider web, weave out everything else that they can search for, and sort of explain how the Norin deck is trying to win. And so what we have here is, the first tutor that I want to focus on is Goblin Engineer, which is, this would be another one of my pet cards that I try to run in as many red decks as I can if I have enough artifacts to justify it. Because Goblin Engineer and Goblin Welder are, you know, best buddies. They both do very similar things about choosing artifacts in graveyards, bringing it back into play. Goblin Welder can get anything swapped out. He can also target your opponent's stuff too, which don't undervalue that. It's always a nice surprise if you can get rid of a Blightsteel Colossus by giving them something else from their graveyard. Goblin Welder is a very powerful 1-drop, but I like Goblin Engineer even better. Now, he does have a cap. Goblin Welder can get back anything from the graveyard, and Goblin Engineer can only get back something mana value 3 or less, but he stocks the yard for you, and so he lets you entomb, he lets you search your deck for an artifact of mana value 3 or less, put it straight into the graveyard, and then you can pull something out with him. And so one of the first things I'll tend to grab with Goblin Engineer is Cursed Mirror, because Cursed Mirror can be a copy of Goblin Engineer. And so assuming I've already played at least one artifact on my board, I'll play Goblin Engineer, put Cursed Mirror in the graveyard, and then as soon as I can activate him, I'll sack the artifact to get Cursed Mirror, which then becomes a copy of Goblin Engineer to get another artifact to put into the yard. And at that point, one of the things I'll grab will usually be Genesis Chamber, which works amazingly well with Norin, because every time he enters, you get a 1/1 mirror token, and so you're getting one on your turn and on each of your opponent's turns, and so you just build up mirror creatures incredibly quickly. Now, this is another symmetrical effect, so your opponents are also going to get the benefit when they have non-token creatures enter, but you're breaking the symmetry with Norin typically, so you're getting a lot more mirrors than they are on average. Another card that can copy Goblin Engineer's ability, at least his activate ability, is Marvin Murderous Mimic. Now, Marvin basically has all activated abilities of creatures you control that don't have the same name as this creature. So when Goblin Engineer grabs Marvin, Marvin can then also sacrifice. You can keep reusing artifacts that go to the graveyard and just keep grabbing them back and forth and reusing those abilities. One other thing that you want to do with Norin is find your spells that deal damage whenever a creature enters battle does 1 damage to each opponent. And Molten Gatekeeper is a 3-mana artifact you can search for with the Goblin Engineer that does just that. As whenever another creature enters under your control, he deals 1 damage to each opponent. And so that's just a way to keep up the pressure, dealing damage every turn with Norin. But then what happens if you have your Genesis Chamber? What happens if you have ways to deal damage to your opponents and you need card draw to refill your hand? Well, there's a lot of artifacts that Goblin Engineer can tutor for that can do just that. You can grab out Skull Clamp, so you can sacrifice all the tokens you're making with Genesis Chamber to get cards. Tome of Legends is another great card that works with Norin, because whenever your commander enters the battlefield or attacks, you put a page counter on Tome of Legends, and so you pay 1 tap, remove a page counter to draw a card. And Norin, since he's entering the battlefield every turn, you just rack up so many counters you don't know what to do, and you're just drawing a card on every one of your turns off the Tome of Legends very easily. Endless Atlas, another good one in a monocolor deck. You can just, once you have 3 mountains in play, and this deck's running 26 mountains, so it's fairly easy to meet that condition, and then you just pay 2 and tap to draw a card. You need the 3 lands in order to activate that ability, but it's usually a pretty easy feat to pull off. Currency Conversion. This is one of my favorite cards in the deck. This would be another of my signature cards, and this was one that was pretty inexpensive until recently. Like in January, you could still get this for like $5-6, but then it shot up to like $15 or so, and I think it's still around 12 as of this recording, but hopefully it gets a reprint. I love it. It's just because it has, whenever you discard a card, you may exile that card from your graveyard, and so I don't really even use it for the filtering thing of pay 2 tap to draw a card and discard a card. I like to use it synergistically with other cards in the deck that discard things. Things like the Embrace the Unknown we talked about. You can do the retrace, discard a land card. Well, when you discard a land card with this in play, you can put the land card into exile, and then you can just tap this to put the land card you discarded into your graveyard, and then you just create a treasure token, because you get, if the card you put in your graveyard is a land card, you create a treasure token. If it's a non-land card, you create a 2/2 black rogue creature token. So you're just using this to generate treasure tokens or creature tokens every turn, pretty much. So, huge fan of Currency Conversion. It's a very versatile card, a lot of uses. And since this is a mono red deck, you can use your Goblin Engineer to search for Ruby Medallion, which makes all your red spells cost 1 less to cast. Just handy, helps you play more spells per turn. Mirage Mirror is another 3-mana artifact that you can get out. And this one can become a copy of any artifact, creature, enchantment, or land. This card just does so much. You can just have it become basically anything you want. Whatever the best permanent on the board is, you can just copy it and get that effect. I love having it copy a land in order to dodge spot removal. People rarely see that coming because a lot of removal specifies non-land cards. And so you can dodge that with Mirage Mirror. Speaking of removal, Unlicensed Hearse. This is another card I try to put in decks. This one is just good graveyard removal, and it sticks around. So the graveyard decks, they have to find a way to deal with this, otherwise you can just keep picking and eating at their graveyard, and meanwhile you're making a bigger and bigger threat that can go out and attack. And since the crew is 2, you can always crew it with Norin, your commander. And so those are just a few examples of things that the Goblin Engineer can tutor for in this deck. And so it covers a lot of ground. You're pretty much hitting a lot of the axes that Norin wants to be running on. You can grab damage dealers like the Molten Gatekeeper. You can grab card draw like Skull Clamp or Tome of Legends. And you can grab removal like Unlicensed Hearse for graveyards. So pretty much whatever you need, you can get that. But with that being said, I wanted to jump over to the other tutor. I have Imperial Recruiter, which Imperial Recruiter can grab the Goblin Engineer and the Goblin Welder, because they both have power 2 or less. So if you don't draw either of those goblins, you can use the Imperial Recruiter to search for one of them. Or you can grab the Goblin Matron, who can then search for either the Goblin Welder or the Goblin Engineer. So there's just a couple of tutors. Now the Matron's limited to only Goblin cards, but the Imperial Recruiter can grab anything with power 2 or less, which there's a lot of here. General Creep, the Bolt Bringer, which is a new card from the recent Jumpstart set. That is a Goblin that can be grabbed by either of these, but this one also has the advantage of dealing damage whenever another creature you control enters. General Creep, Bolt Bringer deals 1 damage to each opponent. So that's another one that can go off with Norin the Wary, and you're starting to just rack up damage. It also has the additional benefit of creating 1/1 red goblin creature tokens tapped attacking when one or more goblins you control attack, which you can get some utility out of, but honestly this deck isn't even necessarily trying to win through combat damage. You're trying to win through non-combat damage with things such as the Agate Instigator. And this is one that can be sort of a mini Perforos if you do the Offspring, because you're paying 2+2 to get 2 creatures that each deal 1 damage. So is where Perforos is dealing 2 damage whenever a creature enters. This is dealing 1 damage plus 1 damage, which gets even better with your ways to increase damage, such as Torbrand, which is another card that can be tutored for with the Imperial Recruiter. Now, Torbrand says, for red source you control would deal damage to an opponent or permanent an opponent controls, deals damage plus 2 instead. So if you have that and the Agate Instigator, then instead of dealing 2 damage when Norin enters, you're dealing 6 damage. You're dealing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you have Torbrand plus any of your damage dealing spells just gets out of hand really quickly. But if you have all that set up and you draw the Imperial Recruiter and you're like, well, what I need is some continuous ramp. Generous Plunderer is a card I really like. This is one that was getting up there in price, like close to $8, but it's since dropped back down to about $5, and I think it's a great pickup. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may create a treasure token. When you do, target opponent creates a tapped treasure token. Whenever Generous Plunderer attacks, it deals damage to defending player equal to the number of artifacts they control. So this one is fun, especially with Genesis Chamber, because if your opponents are playing spells and creating 1/1 artifact creature tokens, and then you have this guy out and you're giving them treasure tokens on top of it, then you have him attack, and he has menace, so he's hard to block. And he deals damage to the defending player equal to the number of artifacts they control. That's a nice effect, but again, this isn't necessarily a combat thing. You're more there just for the incremental token generation. But if you have tokens and you want some card filtering and card draw, Irreverent Gremlin, it's a card from Duskmourn. It's a 2/2 that can be searched for with Imperial Recruiter. It also has menace, and whenever another creature you control power 2 or less enters, like your commander, Norin, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. Do this only once each turn. So, Norin enters on your end of your turn, discard a card, draw a card. Your opponent's turn, Norin enters, discard, draw, discard, draw, discard, draw. You have to do it all around the table. So it has a lot of great ways to filter, and you can be discarding artifact cards into your yard to get back with the Goblin Engineer. Just a whole lot of utility. At one point, I was running Squee in this deck as a way to sort of combo with all the discard effects and get them back, but I ended up cutting him. I might try and bring him back, but I don't know. We'll see. That's another card that you could tutor for if you're running it. But if you have the card draw and the treasure tokens, and you want both, one I've talked about before on this channel, Professional Facebreaker. Of course, I run that in this deck. That combos well with your Generous Plunderer, with making the treasure tokens. Professional Facebreaker also has you sacking treasures to exile the top card of your library, and you can play it this turn. And so when you're playing from exile, that also gets around Possibility Storm. So just a whole lot of versatility with that, whether you want it for tokens or the card draw, because this one has whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. So again, if you do want to send your mirror tokens out to get in some chip damage, just as a way of creating treasure tokens, that's definitely one way to do it. And if you want to make sure that you hit your next couple of land drops with Imperial Recruiter, you can play Solemn Simulacrum, which has been outclassed a little bit in recent years, but I still like it, especially this version. Making friends is hard work, even when you're Poplar. I love the pun. But yeah, Solemn Simulacrum is great in this deck, especially when you've got blink effects, or in this case, you've got Sacrifice and Graveyard Recursion for artifacts that you can do with Goblin Welder to get out multiple lands and draw several cards. And one of the last cards you can get with Imperial Recruiter is Grinning Ignis, which is part of a combo in this deck. So if you have Grinning Ignis and Marvin Murderous Mimic, Marvin has the activate ability of Grinning Ignis. So you can pay a red and return Grinning Ignis to its owner's hand to add 2 and a red to your mana pool. So if you're adding 2 and a red to your mana pool, and Marvin only costs 2, then you pay the 2 and you're left with 1 red, which you can then use to redo the ability. So you can keep playing Marvin over and over an infinite number of times, and as long as you've got a Pandemonium or if you've got some kind of damage dealing effect like a Perforos in there, you can just win the game on the spot. And both of these can be tutored up with the Imperial Recruiter. You can get the Marvin with your Goblin Engineer as well if you need to. But those are just a couple of the ways that tutors have really helped shape this deck. And there are a few other cards. I want to go over a few other categories since I kind of went over those tutor effects. Some of the additional ramp abilities in the deck, such as the obvious Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Liquid Metal Torque, which this is one that turns things into artifacts. Red has a tough time dealing with enchantments, but with this you can turn enchantments into artifacts and then use Vandal Blast or other artifact removal to get rid of them, so that's very nice. Honor 1 Shaku is a oldie but a goodie that combos well with Norin, in that it sort of makes your own Worn Power Stone, and that it taps 1 colorless, but you can tap an untapped legendary permanent you control to untap it. So basically with Norin in play, you can tap Norin to untap this, and it can just get you a little bit more mana. And you can even do this every turn because Norin comes back into play untapped. So if you have ways to use colorless mana during your opponent's turn, the Shaku can come in handy. And Relic of Legends does a similar thing, only it's a tap and untap legendary creature control to add 1 mana of any color. So it's pretty much doing the same thing, more or less. Although it's worth noting that the Honor 1 Shaku is any legendary permanent, so you could do Shrines, you could do Planeswalkers, whereas Relic of Legends is limited to just creatures. But speaking of legendary enchantments, Guild Artisan is also very underrated in a Norin deck. It is a legendary enchantment, so again, you could use your Shaku to tap the Guild Artisan for mana, basically. But the Guild Artisan is a background in the 99, but it says commander creatures you own have, whenever this creature attacks a player, if no opponent has more life than that player, you create 2 treasure tokens. Now, they don't have to connect, they don't have to deal combat damage, you just have to attack the player with the most life. And Norin can do that. Now, as soon as he attacks, he's going to leave, but you can still get the 2 treasure tokens when he attacks before he goes. So I run Guild Artisan, and it just gives a way for Norin to generate treasure tokens on your turn when he attacks. Another way Norin can generate treasure is with Rose Room Treasurer, because it has whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you create a treasure token. And that's what it's mainly used for. If you have, if this is the first or second time this ability is resolved this turn, otherwise you can pay X, and then when you do, he deals X damage to any target. So this can also be a source of removal, but you have to have enough creatures entering in order for that to work. It can usually work if you got like a Genesis Chamber out or something. It all just depends. Another great use for generating treasures is the Magmatic Galleon. So this is from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. And it's a 5/5 vehicle for 5. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 5 damage to target creature an opponent controls. And whenever 1 or more creatures your opponents control are dealt excessive non-combat damage, create a treasure token. Okay, so you got deal excessive non-combat damage to get that, but that is something that can combo with a lot of the other cards in here. For example, you want to talk non-combat damage, there is Pyrohemia. And so this is one to where at the end of your turn, if no creatures are in play, you sacrifice Pyrohemia, but with Norin, it's easy for him to come into play at a turn when it checks that and sees Norin's there, and so it gets to stick around. But Pyrohemia, you just pay 1 red and deals 1 damage to each creature and each player. So you just have to make sure that you've played a spell or somebody's attacked before you activate this, so that Norin can leave for safety, and then you can wipe the board. Now with Pyrohemia combined with something like Torbrand, whenever you pay 1 red, you're dealing 1 damage to yourself and each of your creatures, but you're dealing 3 damage to your opponent's stuff. You know, paying 2 red into it, you're dealing 2 damage to all your stuff, but like 6 damage to everybody else. Which, honestly, 2 damage is enough to pretty much kill most of the creatures in this deck. It doesn't have a ton of big toughness guys, but you can wipe your opponent's board with much bigger threats with much less mana invested. And Vandal Blast is an all-star. It's great in red decks for wiping the board of artifacts, especially when you're giving folks artifacts with like Genesis Chamber or the Generous Plunderer. Mob Verdict is another card I put in here. This is just a fun secret council where each player votes for another player, then those votes are revealed for each vote an opponent receives. Mob Verdict deals 2 damage to that player and each creature that player controls, and then for each vote you receive, you draw a card. There's another card that gets better with the damage increasing effects, because instead of being dealt 2 damage, they'll be dealt 2 damage plus 2 damage for each instance of that. And so it can really wipe the boards pretty quickly. And Reckless Endeavor, I've talked about before. I just love to run it in all my decks. I just love rolling the d12s and seeing what I get. And then Blasphemous Act, of course. It's a commander staple for a reason, and that's just another one I play as far as the board wipes and the sweepers goes. Now for spot removal, we've got like Goblin Bombardment, which again combos well with the Genesis Chamber, as well as Confusion the Ranks, because you can steal their big creature and then sacrifice it so they don't get it back. You do have to be careful with it, because if Confusion the Ranks is out, then people can play an enchantment, take your Goblin Bombardment, and then suddenly they can start sacrificing things. But that's part of the fun. Tybalt's Trickery, this is another card. I just love surprising people with counter spells in decks that are not running blue. Tybalt's Trickery is a very fun way to do that. Shatter Skull Smashing. This is one of the double face cards that's a land on the back. You can use it for removal, but I mainly just have it in there as a tapped land that if I draw in the late game can be a bonus as a X spell that I can dump my mana into. As far as other spot removal, we've got Untimely Malfunction, which is a very versatile card. I love it. You'd be surprised how often all 3 of these modes are relevant. I think I probably mainly use it for changing the target of a spell or ability with a single target, but it's always nice to be able to have the option to destroy an artifact as well. Wild Magic Surge, another great removal card. It's one of Red's few ways to deal with enchantments, in addition to Chaos Warp, which is of course also running. Some of the big heavy hitters, though, as far as damage dealing, Terror of the Peaks combos great with Norin. You're just dealing damage whenever Norin enters to any target. Same thing as Warstorm Surge, just similar effect in enchantment form. And Chandra's Incinerator. Now this one is interesting. Costs X less to cast, where X is the total amount of non-combat damage dealt to your opponents this turn. So that tends to happen somewhat frequently, so this can be very inexpensive to cast. It's typically 6 mana, but you could get it down to a single red, potentially. And it's a 6/6 with Trample, and whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, Chandra's Incinerator deals that much damage to target creature or planeswalker that player controls. So if you play something like a Pyrohemia, and you pay 1 to deal 1 damage to everything, but then let's say you've got Torbrand in play, so you're going to pay 1 red to deal 3 damage to everything, and so then you're going to deal 3 damage to an opponent, to each opponent. And then whenever source control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, then he deals that much damage to target creature, planeswalker they control. So on top of that, you're sending more damage back to the creatures. And if you combine Chandra's Incinerator with Repercussion, that's whenever a creature is dealt damage, Repercussion deals that much damage to that creature's controller. So you can get into this loop to where Chandra's Incinerator will keep dealing damage to creatures, and then the Repercussion, whenever those creatures dealt damage, will keep dealing damage back to the opponent, and just creates this cycle until all the creatures are destroyed. It can get out of hand pretty quickly. So I love Repercussion in this deck. I love Chandra's Incinerator. Just a really fun combo. But the Repercussion is just another one that just increases the damage being dealt, because you're dealing all this non-combat damage to creatures, and then it just flings damage at your opponent. Artisan's Talent does an awful lot. I was really undervaluing the talents when they came out in Bloomberg. I did not expect them to all be as expensive as they're getting, with most of them being $10 or more now. I don't think Artisan's Talent is there yet, but I still like it in this deck. It says, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. So that's nice. There's several other filtering effects like that in the deck already. And then you can make it level 2, and then non-creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Well, that's most of the spells in this deck. It has about 20 creatures or so, but the vast majority of them are non-creature, so that's going to reduce the cost of all those, both red spells and non-red spells. You combine that with Ruby Medallion, and then your red non-creature spells are suddenly 2 less. And the ultimate one, level 3, is if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. So it's doing a very Similar thing to Torbrand, you just gotta sink some more mana into it, but it's also an enchantment as opposed to a creature, so it's a little harder to deal with. But yeah, I really like Artist Talents doing an awful lot. Aether Revolt's another new card from Modern Horizons 3, which does a very similar thing, in that if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent, or permanent they control deals damage +2 instead. So, same thing as the Artist Talent. The only catch is, it has a requirement. As long as a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, which happens every turn in the Norin the Warrior deck. So, Aether Revolt, it's like the card was made for this deck. Because something's leaving the battlefield every turn, so yeah, Revolt just works perfectly with Norin. And then Mechanized Warfare is something that does something very similar. It's just if a red or artifact source you control will deal damage to an opponent or permanent they control, it deals that much damage +1 instead. So again, that one's 3 mana to deal 1, as opposed to like 4 mana to deal 2. But I think all of these ones just really help add up and make your little pinging, your little effects go a lot further. There's a few more cards I wanted to go over. Speaking of the damage dealing ones, Impact Tremors, of course, you gotta run Impact Tremors. Deals 1 damage to each opponent whenever a creature enters the battlefield under control. Same thing as Witty Roastmaster, which is unfortunate as 3 power, otherwise you could search for this with the Imperial Recruiter. It's also a devil as opposed to a goblin, so you can't search for it with a matron. But you just want to run as many of these effects as you can. All Norin needs is 1 to get the ball rolling, and then it adds up really quickly. And then the best one of them all, Perforos. It's indestructible, deals 2 damage when a creature enters as opposed to 1, so it gets out of hand very fast. And then a few other cards I have as far as card draw. Trading Post is another way. You have to sacrifice an artifact to draw a card, but if you're sacrificing a mirror token, it's a lot easier to do. And then you can even sacrifice those mirror tokens as well as a creature to return an artifact from your graveyard to your hand, so you can get back a lot of your best spells that go away. And speaking of getting back your spells, you can also do that with the Pinnacle Monk, which is another one of the cards I have in here that's double face. You can get back an instant or sorcery from your graveyard. I have it mainly here as a tapped land that can occasionally be a creature. Same thing with Kazul's Fury. That's another one that's basically an overpriced fling, but you can use that with the creature you steal off of Confusion in the Ranks. But again, I mainly use it for lands. Same thing with Valakut Awakening. Great card draw spell, but I mainly have it in there for the land count. And Outpost Siege. This is one that I think has been outclassed a little bit, but I still like it in this deck. You can choose Khans or Dragons, and I don't know which one I use more often, honestly. I think I tend to go with the card draw at the beginning of upkeep. You exile the top card of your library, and then you can play that card. But sometimes the Dragons is helpful. Whenever creature control leaves the battlefield, Outpost Siege deals 1 damage to target creature or player. And so depending on the situation, you may want that. But I think that really covers most of the deck. I think I pretty much went over everything except maybe the lands. So there's 26 basic mountains. And then for non-basics, we've got the Sokenzan Crucible of Defiance. And that one I like it for the utility of being able to create 2 tokens. And those ones can, of course, trigger Perforos or other effects. So it has some synergy there. Great Furnace is just there as a inexpensive artifact that I can use to sacrifice to the Goblin Welder or the Goblin Engineer, or to Trading Post to get back something else. War Room, great card draw in a monocolor deck. Dust Bowl is another great way to sacrifice lands to destroy non-basic land. It's just nice, repeatable removal, and since there are artifact lands in this deck, you can sacrifice an artifact land and then get the artifact back. Fountain Port is another way to create tokens, as well as to sacrifice those tokens for card draw. Merrick's can also create tokens, and again, that just combos with Perforos and similar effects. The tokens are also artifacts for things that care about that. Scavenger Grounds, great utility for exiling graveyards. We do want to utilize our graveyard in here, but sometimes other decks are making more advantage of their yard, and we just need to get rid of all of them. Blast Zone, another way that red can deal with enchantments. It's not the most elegant solution, but it will get the job done. You got to invest a lot of mana to get it, but if they've got Aristic Steady or something, you've got to get it off the table, and that's one way to do it. Care Keep, a classic. And this is another one from making those little tokens, just so you can get more triggers from creatures entering. And then Treasure Vault. This is another artifact land that you can sacrifice to create treasures and then bring it back with Goblin Welder, Goblin Engineer to do it again. And you can pretty much do that every turn as long as you're sacrificing one of the treasures you make to get back the treasure vault. And yeah, that's my Norin the Wary deck. Appreciate you listening. If you have a Norin deck, let me know if there's any secret tech that you play that I've missed. And if you've never heard of Norin, or if you've never thought about making a deck like that, I hope maybe this might have made it sound a little more appealing. I know it's not for everybody. I've tried to avoid some of the more chaotic cards in the deck that other Norin decks tend to run. I've just limited it to a few, like Confusion in the Ranks and Possibility Storm, Pandemonium, but again, that ends up hurting me more than anything else. So, but yeah, Norin is just a deck that I've been playing with since 2009, 2010, whenever I started first playing Commander. So yeah, it's been about 15 years that I've had this deck, and so it's gone through a lot of changes, but I feel very happy with where it is now for the most part. There's only a handful of slots that are really negotiable at this point. Most of the cards are pretty locked in, and I feel like I've solved this deck as much as I want to. But thank you so much for listening. I'll plan to do more deck techs like this in the future. Take care and have a nice day.